Good evening. One of my favorite things about spending time with indigenous communities is that it gives me a window into how all of us lived hundreds, even thousands of years ago. It's like stepping back in time and watching how humans once connected with the land, with one another, and with something greater than themselves. And when you do that, when you really observe, you start to see just how much we've gained in our modern world, and just how much we've lost. Let's start with something fundamental: our relationship with the land. In many indigenous or tribal cultures, there are no grocery stores, no water districts, no utility companies, no drive-thrus or convenience stores. Nothing stands between them and survival except their own knowledge of the earth and their own ability to work with it. Their connection with the environment is incredibly intimate. I've seen it over and over again, and every time I'm in awe. I remember meeting a Hawaiian woman on the beach once. We were watching a crab tossing sand out of its hole. She looked at it for a moment and said, "The sand's going north. That means there's going to be a storm tomorrow." And sure enough, the next day there was a storm. These people are in many ways the PhDs of their own ecosystems. They don't just live on the land, they live with it, in partnership, in deep awareness. And it's not just their relationship with nature that stands out, it's also their relationship with each other. In many of these communities, people don't have IRAs, no 401k plans, no social security, no elder care centers. Their safety net is each other. Their very survival depends on staying connected, supporting one another, and showing up every single day. That need creates a kind of closeness and trust we rarely see in modern society. I've seen this firsthand in places like Africa. Women gathered around a well, laughing and chatting, holding their babies while drawing water. One woman passes her baby to another so she can lift the bucket. That woman's goat takes off running, so she passes the baby again to a third woman who just keeps nursing like it's the most natural thing in the world. The kids aren't just being raised by a single mother or even a nuclear family. They're raised by a village, by an extended family unit that wraps around them with warmth and care. And then there's their connection to spirit. That might be the most powerful relationship of all. I've met elders like Malik working side by side with her great-granddaughter Yasmina in the garden day after day. When I asked why they spent so much time together despite the age difference, the answer was simple. Yasmina is just arriving from the spirit world, and Malik is preparing to return. So of course they have the most in common. In these communities, the spiritual world isn't something abstract or distant. It's woven into everyday life. The rivers have spirits, the mountains, the forests, the ancestors, everything is infused with meaning, with presence. Early in my life, I'll admit, I brushed a lot of this off. I saw it as superstition, as naive or uneducated thinking. But that view slowly began to change. And I want to tell you why. Around 25 years ago, I was working in Tibet on a human rights project. During that time, I had the rare opportunity to witness a ceremony involving the medium who channels the Oracle of Tibet, the Dalai Lama's oracle. It happened in a small monastery with about 60 monks in attendance. They brought the medium in, sat him down, and placed a large, heavy ceremonial hat on his head. His face turned red. The monks began chanting and drumming. And then something incredible happened. He slipped into a trance, and started speaking in a high-pitched voice. The monks began writing down everything he said. After 5 minutes or so, the medium fainted. They had to carry him out. I watched the whole thing, trying to figure out if it was just performance, or maybe a health emergency. 2 days later, I interviewed the medium. His name was Thupten. He was 30 at the time, now he's 50. He told me he had no memory of what he'd said in the trance. He just knew that afterward he felt drained, weak for a full day. I asked him how he became the oracle, how someone ends up in that role. He told me that as a child, he began hearing voices and feeling terribly ill. At one point, he thought he was dying, but an older monk stepped in and said, "You have a gift." That monk mentored him, taught him to navigate the trances, stayed by his side for an entire year. That stuck with me. A couple years after that, I was working on another human rights project with Amnesty International in northern Kenya in the Samburu region. As I was taking photos, my guide casually mentioned something that caught my attention. He said, "You know, their predictor told them you were coming to photograph them." At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, I was there taking photos, right? But then he added, "She also said you'd hide from them when you took the pictures." Now that confused me. I usually shoot with short lenses. I'm right in front of the person when I take their photo. But that night, while packing up my gear, I realized I'd brought a new panoramic camera I'd never used before. And that camera required me to shoot from the waist, looking down, focusing in the dark. I wasn't hiding on purpose, but that's exactly what it must have looked like. It was a strange moment. My assistant was amazed. We chalked it up as an odd coincidence. But from that point on, I became curious. I wanted to find more of these people, those who entered altered states to heal, to guide, to serve their communities. That's how I started seeking out shamans. And by the way, shamans never introduce themselves as shamans. You'd never know who they were just by looking. I always had to ask the community, who's the healer here? Who goes into trance? And they'd lead me to the person. Like Nomaj, a Mongolian shaman, or Morgan Yazi, a Navajo medicine man, or Linza, a shaman from eastern Siberia, Mengatohu deep in the Amazon, part of the Romani tribe in Ecuador. I met and interviewed about 40 of them. One of the most fascinating visits was right on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, in a tiny community called the Kalash. Only about 3,000 of them remain. They're animists holding tight to their spiritual beliefs while surrounded by Islam. They have striking features, blonde hair, blue eyes. Some say they're descendants of Alexander the Great's army. They're joyful people known for their wine and celebration. But I went there looking for someone very specific. I'd heard a 6-year-old boy was being initiated as a shaman. I wanted to see the process of becoming, not just the outcome. When I arrived, I discovered the 6-year-old boy was actually a 60-year-old goat herder named Janduli Khan. That's the shaman rumor mill for you. Still, I was intrigued. My 16-year-old son had come with me on the trip, helping me carry equipment. Together we hiked for over a day to reach the mountaintop, where Janduli tended his goats. He welcomed us with warmth and generosity. As with the others, I asked how he became a shaman. And like the others, his story began with illness, hallucinations, confusion. And like the others, he had a mentor, someone older who guided him through it. Shamans in different cultures have different ways of entering trance. In Mongolia, they beat drums. In South America, they drink ayahuasca. In Pakistan, it's something else entirely. They burn juniper branches, pour animal blood on the flames, and inhale the smoke. It's intense. When I asked Janduli not to do a ceremony for me, I didn't want him to kill one of his animals. He told me I have to. My spirits are insisting. You've come all this way. The next morning, his sons built the fire and began the ritual. Janduli prayed to the spirits of the mountains and forests. The animal was slaughtered and the ceremony began. He inhaled the smoke, entered a trance, and stayed there for several minutes. When he emerged, he was quiet, very different from his usual talkative self. I asked his sons what he'd seen or said. They told me the only thing he said was, "Your journey will be extremely difficult, but you will be safe." The next day, my son and I left his camp and continued deeper into the Hindu Kush mountains. As we continued on our journey through the Hindu Kush, we found ourselves completely off the grid. No roads, no clinics, no reliable communication. Just the two of us, a jeep, and the vast, rugged terrain around us. That's when my son started getting sick. At first, we thought it was just a bug, maybe something from the water near Janduli Khan's camp. But by the second day, he couldn't keep anything down. No food, no fluids. Day 3, same thing. Day 4, he was so weak he could barely stand. I was terrified. We were completely isolated, miles from any kind of help. Eventually, we reached a small village. It was pure luck, or maybe something more, that a doctor from Islamabad happened to be visiting his mother there at the time. Not only that, but he had with him a small medical kit, a single bag of glucose and saline, an IV drip, oral rehydration salts, just enough to stabilize my son and bring him back. To me, it felt like a miracle. And then I remembered what Janduli had said after his trance. Your journey will be extremely difficult, but you will be safe. I couldn't shake that. It stayed with me. Not as proof, but as a quiet echo of something I was beginning to recognize, the idea that there's more happening than we can always explain. As I interviewed more shamans, I started noticing patterns in their stories. They almost all described the same progression. First, the call. That's when the psychological crisis happens, often early in life. For many, it feels like a breakdown. Visual hallucinations, sickness, confusion, the feeling that they're losing their mind. But within their culture, it's not seen as something broken. It's seen as the beginning of something sacred. Then comes the mentor. Almost every shaman had someone, a grandmother, a monk, a village elder who had been through it before. Someone who recognized the signs and helped guide them through it. Someone who didn't dismiss them as crazy, but said, "You've been chosen. You're being called." After that comes the initiation. This is usually described as a kind of death, a death of the old self, the identity they used to have. And then a rebirth into something new, a deeper awareness, a broader sense of compassion, an expanded consciousness. They begin to see their place in the world differently. They begin to understand the spirit world not as fantasy, but as a layer of reality that informs and influences everything we see and touch. Once they've moved through that process, they begin their life of service. They become healers, seers, counselors, priests, not for money, not for power, just because that's the role they've been given. Most of them still have regular jobs. They herd goats, raise kids, grow crops. But in addition to that, they serve their community in a way no one else can. It's demanding. Many of them resist at first. The responsibilities are huge. It's exhausting. But ultimately, they accept the role because it's not really optional. It's who they are now. After completing this series of interviews, I didn't quite know what to do with it all. I set the project aside for a while, unsure how to talk about what I'd experienced. Unsure how to explain the world I'd stepped into, a world full of spirits, consciousness shifts, and healing rituals. It felt too big too, outside the boundaries of what we usually talk about. But then, about a year and a half ago, I met someone who brought all of that back into focus. His name was Adam. Adam was in his early 20s when we met. He had gone through what the medical system calls a psychological break. He'd had an experience where everything, his identity, his perception, his thoughts, seemed to shatter all at once. But for Adam, it wasn't just terrifying. It was also beautiful. He described it as his first real connection to the universe. The first time he ever felt like he belonged to something bigger than himself. I was this, and this was me, he said. It was incredible. But it didn't stay incredible. The experience kept going, and eventually it went too far. It became scary, overwhelming, and then the fear set in. Adam ended up seeing doctors, psychiatrists. They put him on medication. At one point, he was taking 15 pills a day. He felt like a lab rat. The side effects were brutal. Vomiting, anxiety, panic attacks. The thought of leaving the house or speaking to people made him physically sick. For 4 years, Adam lived like that. Eventually, he hit a wall. He stopped all the meds cold turkey and enrolled in a Vipassana meditation retreat, a 10-day silent meditation, 10 hours a day, no talking, no distractions, just the raw work of sitting with your own mind. I've done one myself, and I can tell you it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. But for Adam, it helped. It brought him back to a place of balance. He was able to get a job at Whole Foods. He started noticing synchronicities, moments of insight that seemed to line up perfectly with real events. He started sensing that he had intuitive gifts, psychic abilities, healing energy. But here's the thing, he had no one to talk to about it. No framework to understand what was happening. No mentor. And when he tried to return to the meditation retreat, they turned him away because of his history with mental illness. That decision devastated him. Adam isn't alone. There are so many people like him, young people who go through a psychological crisis and end up labeled medicated and stigmatized. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, 1 in 5 people will go through a serious psychological episode in their lifetime. 1 in 20 will become permanently disabled by it. Half of these episodes happen before the age of 14, 75% before the age of 24. In indigenous cultures, this is exactly the age when many shamans receive their calling. But in our culture, it's often treated as a disaster, a failure, something to hide. The difference is staggering. In traditional cultures, when someone begins hearing voices or seeing visions, it's seen as the start of a journey, not the end of one. It's placed in a positive light, not stigmatized. And most importantly, the person isn't left alone. They have a mentor. Someone who's walked the path before. Someone who says, I know what this is. I can help. They also have a community that supports them, not isolates them. And they have an outlet for their gifts, a place to channel the energy, a role to fill, a way to serve. In our world, these same individuals are often marginalized, medicated, and left to struggle on their own. I'm not saying we should abandon medicine or ignore real mental health needs. But what I am saying is that we need a broader lens. We need to recognize that some of these experiences, yes, even the hard ones, might be part of a deeper, transformative process. There's a TED Talk by a woman named Eleanor Longden that went viral a while back. She tells the story of how she started hearing voices when she went to college. When she told her roommate, the response was immediate: "You need to see a doctor." The doctor referred her to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with schizophrenia and put her on medication. From there, things got worse. She spiraled into a dark place, isolated and confused. But eventually, she came to a powerful realization: those voices were trying to help her. They were connected to unresolved trauma from her childhood. With the help of a few trusted friends, she started to heal. She now shares her story to raise awareness and reduce stigma. Eleanor's journey mirrors so many others I've seen. People who go through deep psychological turmoil, not because they're broken, but because they're being asked to grow, to transform, to wake up. And yet the first thing we often do is suppress it, numb it, dismiss it. I've continued to follow Adam's story over the past year and a half. I've shared updates on our blog chronicling his progress and his setbacks. He's homeless now. Like so many others in his situation, he's fallen through the cracks. But even in his struggle, I see potential. I see strength. I see a story that's still being written. We've started interviewing professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, and cultural historians who take a different view. Some believe these crises are not just medical events, but spiritual emergencies. They say if we can hold space for these individuals, if we can avoid labeling them as broken and instead support them, guide them, protect them, then the psyche itself can do the healing. The transformation can happen. And often when it does, these individuals emerge with a heightened awareness, a deeper sense of purpose, a stronger connection to the world around them. There are scholars, psychologists, anthropologists, people who've spent their lives studying culture who believe that we, as a species, are in crisis. They point to our climate, our economy, our endless cycles of war and division. And they suggest that perhaps all of this is forcing us to evolve. Not technologically, we've already done that. But spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, we're being asked to raise our level of consciousness collectively. I find myself thinking about that a lot, especially in the context of everything I've seen, everyone I've met, and the stories I've heard from these shamans around the world. These people who went through what we might call mental breakdowns. But in their cultures, those breakdowns were seen as breakthroughs, as calls to a different kind of path, as part of a transformation that ultimately led to healing, not just for themselves, but for their entire communities. That's why I find myself coming back to one of the most powerful statements I've ever read. It's from Albert Einstein. He said, "We human beings tend to experience ourselves as something separate from the whole we call the universe. This is an optical delusion of our consciousness. It's like a prison for us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." This striving for such achievement, is, in my opinion, the only true foundation for our inner peace and security. That idea that we're not separate from the whole, that our experience of isolation is an illusion that hits home for me now more than ever. Especially when I think about the young people I've met like Adam, or the elders like Malik, or the voices of entire cultures that still believe in a reality beyond what we can see and touch. So what does this mean for us today? Here in a modern world of noise and speed and stress, where mental illness is skyrocketing and loneliness is at epidemic levels, I think it means we need to start changing the way we view certain experiences. We need to stop assuming that every altered state of consciousness is a malfunction, that every young person who has a breakdown is simply sick. Sometimes what we call breakdown is actually breakthrough, a call to shed a false self, a call to explore something deeper. Of course, that doesn't mean we throw out science or stop using medications that help, but it does mean we need more nuance, more compassion, more willingness to ask, what if there's something else going on here? Something that doesn't fit inside a diagnostic box. Because the truth is, a lot of people are waking up right now. They're seeing the cracks in the systems we've built. They're questioning things they were told never to question. They're sensing that something deeper is calling to them, but they have no roadmap, no guidance, no language to explain what they're going through. And when they turn to the culture around them for help, they often find silence, or worse, shame. But imagine if that weren't the case. Imagine if instead we had systems that recognized when someone was going through a spiritual emergence. Imagine if we had mentors like the elders in those tribal communities who could step in and say, "You're not broken. You're being initiated." Imagine if we had communities that supported people during these transitions instead of pushing them to suppress or hide what they're feeling. Imagine if we had institutions that didn't just try to medicate symptoms, but also explored the root causes, the hidden stories, the traumas that need to be witnessed and healed. That's the vision. That's what's possible. Because here's what I believe after all these years of travel and research and listening the human mind, the human spirit. It's capable of incredible transformation. We're not static beings. We're meant to evolve, to shed layers, to grow through struggle. And when we do it right, when we're supported through the hard parts, what emerges on the other side isn't just healing. It's wisdom. So to anyone out there who's felt like Adam, like you were falling apart, like no one understood what you were going through, like the world only wanted to fix you or label you or silence you, please hear this. You are not alone. You are not broken. You may just be awakening. And if you've never been through something like that yourself, but someone in your life has maybe a friend, a child, a sibling, consider being that person who listens without judgment, who doesn't rush to label, who says, "I believe you." You have no idea how powerful those words can be. One of the biggest tragedies in our society is that we've lost our rituals for initiation. We've lost the collective understanding that sometimes to become whole, you have to fall apart first. You have to confront the darkness. You have to lose the story you were given in order to find the truth of who you really are. And the people who go through that, who make it to the other side, those people often come back with gifts, insight, compassion, a vision that's bigger than themselves. In indigenous cultures, that's called being a healer, a seer, a shaman. In our culture, we often call it a diagnosis. But maybe, just maybe, some of those people are the exact ones we need most right now. People who've seen the world break and still choose to love it. People who've broken themselves and come back stronger. People who've stared into the chaos and returned with something sacred to offer. You might be one of them, or you might be close to someone who is. Either way, this is your invitation. Don't turn away. Don't dismiss the mystery. Don't ignore the call. Because the future we're heading into, it won't be fixed with better technology or more data or faster systems. It's going to require wisdom, depth, presence, healing, and that kind of transformation begins with individuals. Just like you. If this message resonated with you, if it made you think differently or helped you see your own journey in a new light, I invite you to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep listening to the quiet parts of your soul that are trying to get your attention. And if you're looking for a community that understands where you don't have to pretend, where your experiences aren't labeled as crazy or shameful, this space is for you. Subscribe, comment, share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. And if this video brought you any kind of peace, clarity, or hope, consider supporting the channel with a like or a super thanks. It helps us keep sharing content that goes deeper than the surface. Because in a world that often rushes past what matters most, we're choosing to pause, to look closer, to tell stories that matter. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe you're one of the ones meant to lead that shift. Quietly, lovingly, relentlessly, even when no one notices until they do. Thank you for being here.